Hi guys, I'm more and more convinced that Brexit Hardman Steve Baker, who happens to be the Northern Ireland minister, loves extracting the urine out of the DUP and gaslighting them. Here he was asked by journalists about the restoration of the Northern Ireland executive, and he started out by saying that he understands the problems facing DUP leader Jeffrey Donaldson. However, he went on to say that his government will do everything in its power to get ministers back to work in Northern Ireland. But the ball is also in the DUP's court. Have a listen.
Of course it's frustrating, we're all frustrated, but Sir Jeffrey's got my sympathy because he's got a very hard problem to deal with. One of the things I have said, and I may regret saying this, but one of the things I've noticed is that some of the people opposed to the Windsor framework were also opposed to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and some of them, it's going to be very difficult to sell anything to them.
Yes, he's being completely correct here. There's some people you can't sell anything to. They're the party of no, and he's talking, of course, about the DUP here. I think he's trying to drive a little bit of a wedge between Jeffrey Donaldson and the rest of the DUP, but I don't think it's going to work. Now, first of all, we shouldn't have sympathy for Jeffrey Donaldson. He's doing okay. It's the people of Northern Ireland who are struggling at the moment because there isn't an executive. They're trying to deal with the cost of living crisis with one hand tied behind their back because the executive is not operating. And that's down to the DUP. Nobody else's fault, the DUP's fault. Now, what I mean that there's a bit of a wedge that can go between Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP is because he's a bit more pragmatic than the rest. Now, we're talking about the DUP, okay, far-right party, extreme party, headbanger party. But there are some people within the party who are a bit more pragmatic than the rest. And I think this is what Steve Baker is trying to do.
But what I would say to everybody is that Northern Ireland can have an amazing, positive future, but we do have to reach out and grasp it and choose it. The best future that is available to people is to restore the executive, make the most of the Windsor framework, and yes, propose improvements if people need to, but make the most of it, make the most of this investment summit, and get on with making the finances sustainable, turning around the health service, dealing with issues like integrated education and so on. Northern Ireland can have a terrific future. We are really clear that we need to get to a position where the executive can be returned. The DUP have put papers to us, we'll respond to them. If we can possibly act to make it possible for the executive to return, we will do those things we need to. But what we can't do is the impossible. It's not possible to reopen the Windsor framework and satisfy some of the hardest line of opinion.
No, it's not. It's been signed. It was an agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom. It was agreed on the European side, and it was agreed on the UK side. The UK government is the one that done the negotiations, spoke with the European Commission over this. It's not up to the DUP. The United Kingdom, its parliament is Westminster, not Belfast. So, the DUP didn't have a problem with giving away representation with Brexit. They used to have MEPs in the European Parliament. They said, we don't want any more of that representation. And now they're complaining that they have no representation. Then they're complaining that the UK government is moving forward without them. But that's the consequence of Brexit. That's the consequence of voting for something you didn't understand.
We've got to be practical, and that means recognising that the European Union have their own stakeholders. The Windsor framework is the deal as it stands, and yes, of course, we'll work with the DUP and try and give them everything we can.
It's frustrating, because the DUP are the only real party in Northern Ireland that's complaining about this. Yes, the DUP are not too happy about the Windsor framework, but they are willing to go forward and form an executive. But what's also frustrating is this has nothing to do with the Northern Ireland executive. Even if the executive was up and running, it would have no impact on the Northern Ireland Protocol. It would have no impact on the Windsor framework, because this is the jurisdiction of the UK government. So stopping the executive doesn't stop the protocol, doesn't stop the Windsor framework. The DUP, it's just a case of throwing their toys out of the pram and hoping that the UK government will tear up the Windsor framework. It's not going to do that. They could have had an argument if support in the UK Parliament in Westminster was 50-50, but there was massive support for the Windsor framework. We're talking about, I think, double digits of votes against it. It won by a massive majority. So the UK government is not going to tear it up. And as the Tories are on the way out, the Labour Party aren't going to do a U-turn and say, well, we're actually going to get rid of the Northern Ireland Protocol or the Windsor Framework. They're fully behind it as well.
I hope everyone will be practical and realistic about what's possible.
And how confident are you that we can make good progress in getting an executive back up and running this side of this year?
Well, the Secretary of State and I both are determined to maintain our optimism, but the reality is that the Windsor Framework wasn't able to bring the DUP straight back. It really is in their hands, and we can't keep going back to and fro about whose court the ball is in. The ball's in both our court, the government with the DUP. We continue, of course, to talk to all parties. But, really, in the end, in a democracy, as we saw throughout the whole process, as painful as it was leaving the EU, in the end, it's in the hands of electors. If electors, unionist electors, want the executive back, they do need to say to their elected representatives that that is what they demand.
Yes, the pressure has to come from voters. DUP supporters have to put pressure on the electors. They have to put pressure on the likes of Jeffrey Donaldson and the party. We need to get back into the executive. There is no benefit staying out. The DUP think they're playing some sort of political long game here. They're not. It's just damaging them. And it's damaging, of course, people in Northern Ireland and businesses in Northern Ireland. And, and I've said this before, the Windsor Framework and the Northern Ireland Protocol is probably the last tool, the last weapon the Unionists have against a united Ireland. Because as it's putting Northern Ireland in a unique position, it has access to the European single market, it has access to the internal market. Yes, there are going to be some problems in October, but it puts Northern Ireland in a unique position, which allows it to attract investment. Now, getting rid of the protocol would get rid of that benefit. A united Ireland would get rid of that benefit as well. So you would imagine that the DUP and unionists would be shouting support from the rooftops when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol, but they're not, because it doesn't deliver them the Brexit that they campaigned for and they promised their voters. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.